Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar on reviewing target markets and the best routes to market. My name is Yvonne Cook. I'm Head of Tourism Development at Visit Aberdeenshire. We live in uncertain times with customer sentiment and behaviour very difficult to gauge, and we recognise the challenges that you face as businesses in planning for recovery. We've developed this webinar and the content to help you to develop your skills in identifying target markets and the best channels to market, and to be doing that in a more structured way. So we have a number of tools and techniques and thought processes to take you through today. But before I hand over to our speakers, just a few housekeeping messages. First of all, in the top right-hand corner of your screen, you can see a little icon labeled View. If you click on that, you can change your view to only speakers or to everyone participating today. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar. You can do that by clicking on the chat function. That's at the foot of your screen in the center there. Please put any questions in there. The box will be monitored throughout the webinar. There will be a breakout session. You've joined the webinar in mute, but when we start the breakout session, there will be a pop-up on your screen that will say join audio so that you can enter the breakout room, but we'll remind you about that at the time. And we'll be running exercises throughout the webinar using the handouts that we shared with you previously, and you'll be advised which handout to use as we go through the webinar. If you've not yet had a chance to print them out, then we suggest that you use the digital copies and take notes that you can add to them later. To get to know everyone on the call, we'd welcome you posting your name and your company name into the chat box. And if you're happy to be contacted by others after the webinar, feel free to add your email address as well. The webinar is being recorded, and we'll send a link to the recording in the next few days. And finally, should the signal drop or we have any technology issues, then we'll contact you by email and let you know what the plan B is. So now we can start the webinar, and I'd like to introduce you to David Andrews and Kieran Parker of Red Kite Innovations. They may know some of you already. They participated in some other webinars we've been running. David will be presenting, and Kieran is the one who'll be keeping an eye on the chat box and raising any questions that you're asking. David, over to you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts and discussion with yourselves this afternoon. Let me just share the screen. Right, so hopefully everyone can see the screen, and hopefully everyone can see the agenda. Everyone nodding? Thank you, that's great. Okay, so a bit of very quickly introduction and scene setting from our perspective. Those who have heard me before through either the Game Changer program or the other webinars that we've run, this is a very interactive session. So again, if you have any questions, just interrupt, shout, put your hand up, or put something in the chat, and Kieran will pick that up for me. Where we're basically getting to is, the market's changing all the time, as people are probably aware. In the sense that COVID has changed almost everything we've done. Business environment is drastically, changed in that result. And literally, our markets have been turned off. The tap's been turned off. And those who've been around for a while might remember foot and mouth. Similar thing happened then. So, these things do happen. The key thing is actually looking at how we can adapt and change the changing market. So for many of us, probably most of you know that, a lot of businesses are really struggling. And, I've personally been hoping to be, reopening by Easter. That might be optimistic, but, some of the statistics that's come from the Visit Aberdeenshire's surveys highlights that, more than 58% of the businesses have lost over 50K or more. 3/4 have reduced their staff numbers, mostly through furloughing, but quite a bit, about 30 through redundancies. And nearly half have run out of cash or will show in the next couple of months. So that's where it's really getting tight in that sense. So we need to be able to adapt. So what this program today is about is just looking at some of the aspects of looking at who our markets are and then how we can reach them. And we're going to look at kind of what I call post-COVID, once the doors open again, so 2021, and then we'll look at longer growth opportunities as well. So as we go through it, we'll have an element of looking at it from two perspectives. Okay, so we have those, but let's look on the more positive side in that sense that we are still, in a fast-growing industry. It's still expected to expand, by about 3 to 4%. Okay, up to 2025. It still accounts for 1 in 10 jobs. We're the 5th top destination in the world, and in terms of Scotland, we're looking at 17.5 million overnight trips, 5.8 billion in expenditure, 133 million day trips worth about 5 point similar level. So that day trip and overnight split fairly evenly. But the other aspect is, thinking about accessing the different aspects of information. So in terms of looking at the kind of sources of data, there's lots of different places that you can look for your information. You have your best information, which is your sales, traditional sources, your sales, your bookings, your occupancy levels, your feedback from customers. These are probably the most powerful sources that you can look at. Other aspect includes website analytics, social media analytics. Those will give you, great detail. And then you got your third-party sources, I call them. You got your online reviews, you got Facebook, you got Twitter, you got TripAdvisor, you got Visit Aberdeenshire, Visit Scotland, Visit Britain, World Tourism Organization. Again, what you can have is lots of different insight to about your visitors. So there's lots of information out there. So what today we're going to do is just try to pull that together and focus a bit about target markets on that front, and then look at the routes to market. And from that, hopefully you'll be able to develop an action plan on that side. So most of you will probably find that the domestic visitors are very much more familiar with yourselves, and currently in the current situation, they're probably going to be a core market going forward for 2021. And again, there's generally lower marketing costs for them. They're often easier to deal with because you can deal with them directly. And from that point of view, you can build that relationship up with them. There may be short break style inquiries. They may be, there's no language cultural aspects, but, and your return on investment is likely to be established more quickly because in effect, the business will probably be much more short term. International markets, slightly different in that sense. Again, visitors may have limited knowledge about Scotland and Aberdeenshire. They may have, again, potentially the marketing costs are higher, although online cost remains the same, except, the translation aspect. The tourism businesses yourselves, less likely to deal directly, therefore you'll have some aspects of group operators or tour operators linked into that process. And they're probably going to be varied itineraries that would basically maybe on tour, doing longer stays, different aspects, different cultural dimensions and so forth that you need to think about. So all this information that you have it's accessible, and Deirdre at Visit Aberdeenshire is a fantastic source of knowledge. So if you haven't used VA Market Insights, then please do on that front. In terms of the target market, so really what we want to do is try to identify the best markets for you. And the target market analysis that I'm just going to take is basically, you can't be relevant to everyone in the market. You basically need to think about how you can target your product, your services, and match it up with the customers. You need to have that specific tourism market segment, almost your ideal customer. So we're going to focus a bit of tools on how you can identify that. And then we're going to look at aspects about how you can then reach them. So the persona canvas is one aspect, which we used as a tool to create that description of your ideal customer. And again, as we said, the tourism industry has lots of different aspects. In many ways, we have to work collaboratively together because it's the whole experience that makes up for the tourists. It's the time they leave their front door to the time they get back, and all those different actions and interactions in between. So there's potentially hundreds of people involved in developing that overall experience. So you can provide the best accommodation experience or the best attraction or the best amenities or experience, but it also relies on everyone else in that journey with them to be able to do the same thing. So it's linking all that elements together. So in one sense, yes, you can target what's right for your business, but you need to also think about how it fits into the wider picture. So we'll kind of link that into as well. The other aspect is, it is a very competitive environment. And again, market segments that we're going to be looking at will probably be linked very closely to what Visit Aberdeenshire is looking at, which is very aligned with Visit Scotland. So you have that kind of piggybacking effect where you're riding on the back of each other's activities. So the Scottish brand is very strong in the international market. So therefore, linking into those values towards your target segments become important. In terms of the other aspect, I think, is just thinking about when you're thinking about your identified target markets, is then you have to be able to communicate with them in an effective way. And that's where it's basically, once you identify who your target market is, then it's about how you reach them, how you communicate with them. And so we'll pick that up in the second half of today. So top markets, well, from that perspective, this is information from Visit Scotland's 2017 to 2019 average over those 3 years. UK, i.e. domestic, is still number one. It's about 80% of the business, 20% is the international. In terms of the top 5, it's USA, Norway, Germany, Netherlands, and France, based on volume on that front. So again, you can give you an indication of where your potential top markets are going to be. Okay, so within each of those markets will be a various number of segments within that. In terms of reaching them, there's a concept here which I call the 5 A's. Now the 5 A's basically are access, accommodation, attraction, activities, and amenities. And first of all, the first A is access. You need to be able to access the markets. And therefore, to access those markets, you need to think about where they're coming from. Now, Aberdeen obviously has an airport, international airport, and it has, and again, the numbers, these slightly variations on that, but a number of key destinations within the UK, but also in terms of some of the key markets. If they don't have direct flights, then we obviously have Edinburgh Airport nearby, which is the UK's 6th busiest airport, and again, there's opportunities to reach those further afield. So access is very, very important. It doesn't mean just air, rail, road become very important. So for the domestic market, the new bypass around Aberdeen, well, it's not new anymore, I know. But the point is that, that bypass has opened up travel time and opens up more access to the markets. So again, access is the first A. Second A is accommodation. Now this list here, it says literally it's been taken from TripAdvisor and Telegraph. So I just did this as a customer and said, right, Aberdeenshire, accommodation. And what came up was, these are some of the names that were on the TripAdvisor top 10 and Telegraph. So I combined the two lists together. And some of these places you'll know. Five Farms, obviously, it's named very much about the kind of cultural dimension and also and that side of it. Again, all the different aspects. So I'm not saying there are any preference on that. What I'm trying to highlight, if I was a customer and I searched on Aberdeenshire accommodation, what will come up probably would be, if I look at some of those things, these are some of the names coming up with. Not to mean it's not the only ones. So what I'm highlighting is that's what came up in my process. Similar for attractions. Again, this was a TripAdvisor list. Again, these are the ones that would come up the top 5 in terms of that aspect. So what I'm really highlighting is what's going into the mind of the customers when they're looking forward to things. How do you reach them? So what I'm in effect doing here is putting myself in the shoes of the customers and walking through that journey and saying, okay, what would they look for? One is about access to the destination. Then it's saying, okay, I need accommodation if I'm or I need attractions. If I need activities, golf, venture activities, these are the ones, again, coming up fairly high on the list. And this is things like Visit Aberdeenshire, focusing on festivals, walking, fishing, wildlife, the outdoors. Now, currently with the COVID aspect and all the feedback we're getting in terms of the tracking of COVID and the pent up demand, hopefully for staycations, is these aspects where you have the outdoors, people feeling it's safer, has an opportunity. So, outdoor adventures, touring, walking, fishing, all these outdoor activities in the minds of customers, especially certain segments, some of the older segments, will play an important factor going forward. Thinking amenities, again, food and drink, very important. Shopping, events, so the tech P&J Live, eventually the cruise ship terminal 2023, still happening next year in the main port, but obviously the South Port will open up in 2023. Again, these are things that are linked to it. So if you just took that cruise ship terminal in 2023 and thinking longer term, therefore we have the opportunity to think, okay, we have potentially ships coming in, we need to have those package tours ready for them. whether it's morning and afternoon, depending on the times of the arrivals and departure. And that means there's opportunities there. And then lead-in time, if you're working with tour operators, again, you have a lead-in time on that front that you need to be able to provide that with. But again, each of those 5 A's, then you can then start getting insights to some of the things that they're looking for. They're looking for potentially access to the destination. They're looking for accommodation. They're looking for attractions. They're looking for activities, looking for amenities. Okay. So again, when you're looking at your segment profile, you should start thinking about that. So for each of those, you need to develop a profile for each of those customer segments. And that's basically creating that single picture of your customers with tangible, relevant insights that can be tested. And again, anytime you raise any assumptions, you need to be able to just think, okay, note them down, and then try to give them some verification later on. Now, in terms of you thinking about the profiles, that you're thinking about all these different aspects, there are not just the physical aspects like the 5 A's, but also there's emotional aspects as well. What kind of cultural dimensions are they looking for? What kind of consumer choice, where the whole world is now accessible. If you go back a few decades, it would have been very much limited to probably, UK or possibly into Europe. Now the world's your oyster. And of course, there's that whole global competition as well. So the perception of people will depend. So currently, even now with the COVID, in one sense, the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, that link to it highlights the fact that it's one of the fastest rolling out. People have that awareness. Oh yes, they're ahead on the vaccination process. Therefore, they must be safer than someone else. That kind of thought process will go through certain market segments, and therefore there's an opportunity to tap into that. So the way we look at this is we develop what we call a persona canvas. Now here's an example of the persona canvas. This should have been in a handout that you should have. And the way it works in this sense is we start with the need. What is the need of this customer? What's their kind of job they really need to be done? Is it about getting out and seeing family and friends? Is it about just being allowed to be freedom and being able to go somewhere out post-COVID? Is it about actually my planned trip that I had from last year, I still want to do in 2021? What is their need? Is it just basically getting relaxation? Is it about just spending time with family? Whatever their need is, that's the kind of the core thing you need to think about. Now that can be quite difficult to tackle. Often the best way is looking at your past customers and getting the feedback and insight into that. But also using that market insight that I talked about from Visit Scotland and Visit Aberdeenshire, where they do have market information about certain core segments that those organizations are targeting. From that, you can then pick up a picture. Is it a male or female predominantly? Who's the decision? Can you give them a generic name, or do they have a role? It's kind of building a picture. You've heard this saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Well, this is kind of what we're trying to do here, is develop a picture. This becomes your kind of core target segment of that one you want to find. Positive and negative aspects. So you think about what their hopes are. So maybe it's being able to see their family, relatives that they haven't seen for a long period of time. If we're looking at post-COVID, it may be opportunities, maybe the fact that they want to explore somewhere they haven't been for a lot before, or maybe it's a childhood memory, or maybe it's somewhere that happens to be purely geographically located between different family members. There will be different aspects behind that. Some of the positive trends that they might be thinking about is the fact that the aspects of maybe from their perspective, they basically have the opportunity to go for a family get together. Maybe it's an anniversary, maybe there's some aspects, maybe there's an element of other positive trends in their aspects. Maybe they've just had a career path improvement, or whatever it might be. There's positives on one side, negatives on the other. Some of the negative trends might be the concern about safety in terms of catching the COVID. It could be the variations of strands of COVID. It could be linked to Brexit and the changes there, where because of pet passports are no longer valid, they don't have the opportunity to bring their pets, go abroad with their pets, so therefore they're looking to stay in the UK. That might be seen as a negative. So there may be some headaches in the sense that maybe they might have family who, or maybe children who are grown up, but maybe they can't get time off work, or maybe because they're now home working and doing things differently. Or there could be fears, maybe fears about the environment, fears about safety, fears about job security, so forth. These are getting some emotional aspects, insight into the customers. So just to give you an example of that then, in terms of a predetermined one, and this is linked to a tour, Jacqueline, who's allowed me to use this. She's basically looking at a tour for students or delegates going to a university conference or something, so it's linked to the university. They very much culture at heart. They're looking for value for money, but they want to have a good time and learn about it. So one of the things that they looked at is hopes to develop knowledge at the conference, opportunities, possibly returning trip for a holiday. Always wanted to come to Scotland, and this was an opportunity through the conference to come to Scotland. They also want to have the opportunity to travel with friends and have an annual holiday, making the most of the opportunity. But they're also very social media savvy. On the negative side of things, this example is limited disposable income, time restricted, arranging travel and sightseeing is a pain, hotel not in the center of town, that is an issue that potentially jet lag and tired because they're coming from overseas. Fears, maybe the seminars might be too detailed or out of depth, maybe the knowledge is too great for them, or not doing well enough in the studies. So there's different aspects. So it gives you a picture, and then from that, it allows you then to think about, okay, I know more about the customer. Now it's basically, how do I reach them? So what we're going to do now is we're going to give you a go to develop a persona canvas for one-year deal customers. But before that, Kieran, is there any questions coming up or anything on the chat? I saw a few hands going up. I'm not sure.
No, I've had no direct questions at the moment, David. No. Has anybody got any they want to bring up? I can't see any at the moment, David.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll move on then. So where we're going then to is basically the exercise now is I want you to take the persona canvas and develop one for one of your ideal customer segments, ones that you feel are important. It can be either now in the short term, or maybe it could be something that's maybe more relevant in the longer term. I don't really mind. The key thing is I want you to be able to try to use this tool to get that insight. If you think you know something, you're not sure, so say, I think this, it's an assumption, make an asterisk, and then you can maybe go back and try to find some research on that. So we'll give you, 10 minutes? Kieran, where'd you gone, Kieran? You disappeared on me.
I am here. I'm just watching the screens. Yeah, 10 minutes is fine, David. If we go till 30.
So yeah, it's 25 past. So we'll give you 10 minutes to kind of pull that together, and then we'll move on to the next thing, which is the customer journey.
David, you're on mute. It's like being on a silent movie.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay, so next
These are black and white. Oh, sorry.
Does anyone have any specific comments or questions about the canvas at this stage? It's fairly common, logical in terms of what we're trying to do. It's basically trying to, as a way to capture insight about your customer. Okay. The next stage is what we're going to focus on then is customer journey. And this is very useful tool. In effect, it's putting yourselves in the shoes of your customers and seeing their customer experience through their eyes rather than maybe seeing it from the company's perspective. Basically, we use a canvas which is called the customer journey canvas. And basically, there's kind of three main angles. There's the customer's needs, which is what are the key actions they take. So whether they maybe inquire about the site, accommodation or attraction or activity, or maybe it's the looking on the doing a search. Maybe it's when you make the first contact, either email or maybe through an OTA, or it could be different aspects. So you take them through the different stages they have on that customer's needs and thinking about what are the key actions, what are the key things they need from that action. At that key moment, it's also what's their expectations. Okay, so for example, if they send an email regarding availability, maybe, then their expectations could be varied differently. So if they're overseas visitors, they might have an expectation that might take a bit of time to come back, because maybe a time difference and so forth. But it could be that their expectation is they need a response back in the next few minutes. So again, understanding what their expectations are is an important aspect about how to deliver the experience they want, but also understanding their kind of aspects behind it. And then there's the emotional side. What are the ups and downs of that customer journey? All right. So I was just going to give you an example in terms of, here's one. Now this is basically Castle Howard, which is sits outside of York where I live. Castle Howard was kind of known for its filming of Brideshead Revisited, probably about 40 years ago, but they still use that tagline linked to it. And I was just wondering whether or not they were open during the kind of prior to the lockdown we're in now, but it's just prior to that, so during Christmas time. And so that was my need. I needed to know whether or not they were open, so I could either go up and take my dog for a walk. And so basically, I went on the website, and their home opening stage is this kind of aerial view coming in, and it says, you won't be able to say it, but it's basically, it's time related. So it'll say either good morning or good afternoon. So when you come onto the page, it has its time related. So there's a personal greeting with an aerial shot of the estate. So that, basically, I thought the greeting was great. It was time linked, but it didn't answer my question. I still needed to scroll down to find an update. So when I scroll down, you have to remember that there's a large percentage of people who don't scroll down on web pages. They just click to the next page. They don't realize they have to scroll down, or they're not, they're looking for that information in a different way. So you had to scroll down, and then they had a Visit England good to go recognition, which is this tick on the left-hand side, and there's quite a bit of detailed information with lots of print to read. Okay. So I ended up clicking on opening times, and because the house is closed but the gardens are open, again, they use an image linked to that. So again, on that point of view, they have an element where the website links to the kind of responses. And so it uses today's date. So again, it says, Castle are opening, so it gives you reassurance that this is up to date. And it basically has a photo of the grounds as the house is closed. And then they move on to, because you have to book in advance, and they have an online message for COVID, which is pre-booking to manage capacity. And it reassures you, if you're running late, don't worry, we'll fit you in on that front. So that's kind of a small example of how you can use this customer journey. So even just using it sorry, didn't want to go forward back. Just going through an inquiry on their website is one aspect of how you can use this. You can use it much longer. You can have as many touch points as you go along. You can do the whole journey from the time they leave the front door to the time they get back. There's lots of different ways of doing this, or you can just look at it from a kind of elements. So I'm just giving you an example how this works through. Okay, so where we're up to now is that once you have done it, it's okay, what do you learn from that? And the last step of the evaluation is to think about, okay, how do I communicate things differently? Are there specific content or specific essential information I need to get across? So linking at COVID, maybe it was on the homepage, good afternoon. Unfortunately, that house is closed, but the gardens are open. That would be a simple way for me to overcome one of the barriers I had, which was I had to go to the next bit and I had to scroll down. Maybe there's ways about possible improvement in terms of how sorting the available information by the different relevance to customers. So again, those who want gardens, those who want houses, you might have the ability to split and have different messaging from that point of view. So there's a communication angle to this, and there's the kind of interactional aspect, which is potentially what's preventing customers from interacting with myself. How can I improve that interaction in that sense? So looking at those different aspects is then thinking about taking that knowledge and trying to evaluate that. So you've done the customer journey, you then need to also learn from that. Because one of the key things is it may throw up things that you just thought, oh, I knew that all the time, but you hadn't done anything about it. And it's actually saying, well, it could be a potential pain to some customers, it might be not so much of an issue for others. And again, even little things as you go through it. So again, you can look at your customer experience using a similar tool. So what I want you to do now is take one of your target market segments that you identified, and I'll just use either an element of the customer journey, but maybe it's just looking through your website or how you reach them or their kind of customer journey. But I just want you to basically, take one of your target markets and evaluate use the customer journey. So I just want to make sure that you get used to using the canvas and you have understanding how it works. So is there any questions that people might have? Karen, you're shaking your head. That's good.
I've picked none up in the chat, David.
Okay.
So what do you want to, how long are you going to give people to do this task?
No, again, I'll probably say, I'm just looking, no more than 10 minutes, seven to 10. We'll see how get people's going up, but 7 to 10 minutes.
The timer is set, David. There we go. David, do you mind just putting up the previous example so people can just work through that, please? It's just come up. Isabel Foy's just requested that. That's good. Thank you. Hi, David. We've got a couple of minutes.
Yep. Okay.
And David, before you, just while everyone's just finishing off here, it might be worth you just looking in the chat because Simon Lucas has just put something in there.
Oh yeah, I can see about glider pilots.
Yeah. So it could be quite useful just to bring that up.
I might ask Simon if he minds to expand on that.
He's not on video, so you know, I don't think.
I can be audio.
Oh, there he is. Just to forewarn you, if you do bring him in, he's on mute at the moment.
No, I've unmuted now. I'm learning the technology.
Okay, Simon, what do you kind of expand on your point that say new ways to bolt on services visiting glider pilots?
Well, okay, so I'm setting up a holiday cottage accommodation here in Braemar in the Highlands. One of the things that I do is fly paragliders. So I've basically put some information on the cottage website about that. But if you're a visiting pilot, depending on your skill level, you can do with some support, either based on local knowledge, so that I could see a level of local knowledge, just a bit of advice over the phone, maybe a local guide in person, or even a local training instructor. And then for people that glide and fly distance, somebody needs to find them and pick them up with the car. So that's another service you could operate. So just using this canvas enabled me to flesh that out, and I can see those bolt-on options that you could offer. Yeah. Okay. Well done. And that's part of the aspect. It opens up the opportunities, but also gives you the insight to the customer as well. So that's well done. Thank you for that.
Good.
Okay. Any other questions? Anyone else? I'm just thinking.
Can't see any other points or anything, David. We have finished anyway. The time's up in terms of the
time's running, so I know we've got to keep going. Okay. So once we've done that, we're now to the point to say, okay, well, how do you define your target market? Well, first thing is look at your current customer base. That will give you insight to the feedback you get from your current customers. You also can check out your competition. Okay, so they may have customer targeting certain segments which you think actually, that might be relevant for myself. Always analyze your product or service against, and having that flexibility. Flexibility is going to be really important going forward. Consumers are expecting more and more. They want to be treated as individuals, and they have that unique aspects and that kind of unique experience. but how can you adapt? So almost like Simon was highlighting, by understanding that, then you can potentially be able to bolt on additional services, whether it's pickup, servicing, or, giving those different aspects to enhance that experience. Also think about the demographics to your target market. Okay, so for example, is it a growing population, growing age group? Maybe it's younger segments. How does that link into some of their habits and cultural aspects, in terms of reaching them, which we'll pick up a bit more after the break. And so again, it's looking at some of those different aspects. Is it a growing market? Is it a declining market? Those are some of the things you need to think through as well. Those emotions and values to your target, so coming up from that persona canvas. Again, some of the aspects behind that is it linked to a celebration, which should be a positive aspect. Maybe it's an anniversary, maybe it's a birthday, maybe it's a wedding. So again, there's different aspects behind the emotional side of it, and having that insight again can help you with the communication. And then always evaluate your decisions based on that information that you have. If there's some elements that you don't have information about, go out and try to find that, try to test those assumptions. It's like any business decisions. You base a decisions, often I use the 80-20 rule. 80% of the time you got to think it's right. But if you base your whole business model on that 20% and it proves to be wrong, it can go disastrously wrong for you. So again, that's helping you define it. Some of the ways to research those different aspects, well, as I talked about earlier, which markets of Visit Scotland and Aberdeenshire going focusing on, how long do they stay, but also how much do they spend as well might be another aspect. So for example, certain international market segments stay a very long time, but they don't spend much money. Some other segments stay a short time, but spend lots of money. So again, depends on and what they want to do and what they like to travel and who they're working with. So is it work related? Of course, the Northeast has been very strong because of the oil and gas that we always had that good corporate market. But that's declining in that sense because as the industry declines. And so how do we replace that with other aspects? How do we get those corporates to come back as leisure visitors at a different time? Those are different aspects. Again, each of those different, one way I remember thinking about that is, is again, you may have a golf tour group coming from America and they might be bringing their partners. It may be the golf is the motivation for that, but there might be other elements. Each individual, yes, they have a common theme in that group, but they may have variations and you have to be able to accommodate and have that flexibility to deal with those different aspects. So again, you need to think about all those different aspects. Again, the more insight, the better you know your customer, the easier it is to communicate with them and the easier it is to convince them to come in and visit yourselves. So once you have that target markets, then it's thinking that selection. Talked about market size, proximity, growth phase, do you have a competitive advantage? So for example, if 80% of your market's coming from the UK, and a good chunk of that might be in this year might be coming from Scotland and the central belt, then how big is that market? Is it a growing market? Is it one which has already knowledge about the area been before, therefore it's more about enticing them to come back? Or is it a first-time visitor? How far away? So again, someone from Cornwall would have a very long trip to get all the way up to the Northeast. But if they're in London, and for example, with the new route from Gatwick, EasyJet flying from Gatwick to Aberdeen, that could open up new opportunities on that front. So again, proximity could be distance, but it could be also, more importantly, time. What about the growth phase of that? Is it someone who, think about the lifetime value of that customer segment? How long, is it something that will potentially come back every couple of years or maybe more frequently? And what's your competitive advantage compared to other destinations? Remember, keep testing each of those with the measurable aspect. Are they measurable? Are they accessible, substantial, and actionable? If you can remember those when you're looking at your market segments. So when you go back to, say, the international markets where we have, USA, and that Germany was very important. Even though we don't have direct flights from Germany, the Germans love to come on doing touring holidays, and therefore they might be coming over by ferry and picking up and driving up that last bit. So, I used to be chief executive of Yorkshire Tourist Board. We know there's a lot of Germans who are coming through the ferry route through Hull, driving up through the Dales, up to Scotland, doing the tour around Scotland and driving back down again. So again, having that insight about them, and we know that the Germans will pre-book a good chunk of their holidays. Probably, you know, a lot of it's be pre-booked, but the last couple of days maybe has some flexibility. So again, that gives you insight to how you have the ability to communicate and try to convince them to come to yourselves. So when we're thinking post-COVID, then, you know, so there's a number of different factors that we need to think about. Business needs, cash flow. You know, do we need to get money in the coffers? Do we need to get customers from wherever we can find them? What is the low-hanging fruit? Well, probably previous customers will probably be a good opportunity to get them to come back because they're already aware of you, but already building some loyalty and trust with them. Can you convince them to come back? Where else would be the low-hanging fruit, as I call it? The easy to reach, people who, you know, has the least number of barriers to kind of prevent them from coming. If that's another aspect, is of course, if your resources are low in terms of marketing, you know, you're looking at low-cost marketing opportunities. Therefore, you're probably looking at using social media and other aspects of that. Or more, it could be partnership and collaboration, working, you know, riding on the back of other campaigns, whether it's Visit Scotland or VA. So again, there's different ways of looking at that. Again, you need to think about what's important to your business, but also in terms of generating the cash. Again, as I mentioned before, assumptions, as you work through any assumptions, if you have any assumptions, make sure you note them and make sure that you try to fulfill those aspects. I've mentioned that before. So what we're going to do, we're going to have another exercise where I want you to think about your short-term and longer-term growth targets, markets. Okay, so what would be in terms of 2021 is what I'm calling the short-term markets for you, and then longer-term 2022 and beyond. So what we're going to do is I got an exercise here. So I'm going to ask you to do that for your business individually first, and then we're going to have a coffee break. Okay, so we're going to have a break as well. Allow you to stretch or get a cup, a new brew. And then we're going to break you into groups. And then in your groups, I want you to discuss your kind of short-term and longer-term growth targets. So at this stage, we'll allow you to focus on that. And then I'm hopeful that someone from VA will break you into groups. And so at some stage, you will disappear and break into, I think it's going to be 4 groups. I'm just looking for confirmation from someone.
I say it's 3. We'll go into 3, David. Yes.
Down to 3. Okay. So we're going to break into 3 groups. So there'll be probably about 10 people in each group. And there's an opportunity to have that discussion about your target marks, short term and long term. So have an individual thought about your short term and long term growth target markets, and then grab a cuppa, and then when you come back, and you will be broken into groups, and you can have that discussion within that group and see if there's any commonality of your thoughts.
David,
there'll be a host in each group who will take some notes. So there'll be someone from Visit Aberdeenshire in each group to be able to feed back. Yes, Kieran.
Okay, what time do you want people to come back after the, so just so everyone's clear, a couple of minutes just to go through it from themselves, working on their own, take a 5-minute coffee break.
Yeah.
And then if we do the breakout from what time, 5 past?
5 past sounds about right. So
okay.
7 minutes to do there, including a coffee break, and then we'll have a discussion in the groups. And
right.
For group leaders, you know, probably talking 10 minutes, no more. Yeah, about 10-minute discussion, no more. Okay, see how this discussion goes.
So come and then come back for about 3:15. That's for Yvonne, you and me. Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, unfortunately, we got caught off in our prime, and I had one person we still hadn't had a chance to, so apologies to showing up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of the
or facilitate
and have some feedback. So I might as well kick off from my group. So we had a variation of it, but basically most people felt that the short-term post-COVID, it will be local, staycation market. There'll be potentially some wedding overflow, as I put it, for people from last year, and some people looking for smaller weddings maybe as well, to try to squeeze it in. I know from kind of my work with the York Museums Trust, I'm a trustee there, that, you know, they have some venues and the demand for that weddings have increased significantly. It's trying to match from those carryover from last year, but also this year. There also the aspect of opportunity to link into the Northeast 250 and linking back to the heritage and the Gulf and heritage and whiskey and all those aspects. And there was Nigel picked up a very strong point about a potential campaign, golfing campaign, linking a number of courses together with partners, which then brings that rest day to be able to go out to castles and whiskey and so forth. And the other aspect was the kind of going further ahead, though, than you hopefully going back to the overseas market. Again, they felt some variation of that, where the kind of high likelihood is that, you know, the Americans, which are maybe more risk averse than, say, Northern Europeans, and therefore you may find that there's a delay of the Americans to come over till maybe, you know, beyond 2022, maybe 2023. So again, there's some variation on that. Linked in some aspects about creating, you know, kind of messaging was to create awareness that the Northeast is open, it's safe, it's the outdoors, which kind of firms that. Links into kind of Simon and the paragliding opportunities, and you know, there's only one other provider. He was saying in Scotland over by, and so therefore there's a kind of uniqueness there. So a very interesting, but predominantly staycation, local, getting previous customers back, and then hopefully returning back to more normal going forward. Kieran, over to you.
Okay, David, thank you. There was 6 people in the group, and all of the room managed to speak. I think predominantly because of my excellent facilitation skills, David. I think we'll split the task up into 2, the 2021 to 2022, and I think it was really good to hear that everybody within the room had acknowledged the fact clearly that the pandemic was here. How could you not? But actually that had to focus on the domestic markets, whether that be Scotland or England. And that involved predominantly changing some of the business models that were involved from pre-pandemic days. So it was focusing on the staycations, thinking about the fact that you couldn't have the universities in or children's parties, and then moving over to more family groups, which would be acceptable, hopefully, as and when the restrictions would allow us to do so. One of the comments that was made from one of the individuals was that potentially that it could be almost like a blessing in disguise, some of this in terms of making us all focus on, as both as customers and as providers, actually move away from the international market and realise what a rich offering we have within Scotland. And I think essentially then looking at 2022 was, depending on basically the restrictions being shifted, people then opened back to more normality, but it just all depends on how this whole thing pans out basically. I don't think there's any other comments I would pick up other than that.
Okay, thank you for that. Yvonne, you did the third group, didn't you?
Very similar thinking in group 3, and the 5 tourism businesses in that group were able to speak, although some not for very long. Focus in 21 was local and in many respects very local, and also looking at Scotland as well. Recognition that VFR, visiting friends and relatives market, is also part of that, and a target market too. And also recognising the importance of repeat customers, not just returning ones, but one business reported existing customers booking even more frequently for in 21 than in previous years. Looking ahead to 2022, I guess some of the discussion around the target markets reflected the slides that you put up, David, during the presentation, and the order of importance, particularly the European markets, Scandinavia, Germany, France, and the Netherlands being those most in focus, but also thinking ahead to 2023 and potential more cruise ships coming into the new South Harbour. And 1 or 2 businesses recognising also that working with the travel trade is a good way of targeting relevant markets. Oh, sorry, another one, what cropped up quite frequently as well was promoting outdoor activities. I guess in response to a lot of the research that's been coming out around to focus on the outdoor that will be there, is certainly there at the moment and likely to be there in the short to medium term.
Great, thank you for that, Yvonne.
Right, okay. So I have to say pretty much covering everything that's been mentioned beforehand. We had quite a few self-caterers in our group. There was 5 of us, although Demi didn't manage to join in until the last minute. But focusing in the short term, like the rest of the groups, UK, Scottish visitors, and even a more local market, because there was concerns that for this summer in particular, what restrictions there might be, and if we were to go back into the tier system, then for one of our members, having visitors just coming from Aberdeen would be perfect, because if there was any restrictions put in at any given time, then they would hopefully still be able to have visitors moving from city into shire. I think there's been a lot of learning from the first lockdown, looking at things like making sure it's clear about refundable bookings, etc., and trying to get over those kind of concerns. Longer term, again, international, visiting friends and relatives, and just in general, the international tourism. Again, we spoke quite a lot about, dependent on the restrictions, this virus is not going to go away anytime soon. So will there be measures put in place that look at visitors coming in? Have they had the vaccine? Will they be required to be tested and have a negative test before they come in to the area? So a lot still to be considered for the longer term markets.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Right, I'm just going to flick back to my screen. Hopefully that looks okay to everyone.
That's good, David. Yeah, you're on the right one.
Okay, so thank you for that. And again, as part of that, there's good exercise in the sense that you're sharing ideas, but also thinking about looking ahead. So it's not just the short term. Yes, we have to survive the short term, but we also need to focus going forward. So one of the things that was, just to recap very quickly before we move on to the next section on best routes to market, is to think, okay, market analysis, identifying those target markets through the 5 A's, customer journey, your profile of the target segments in terms of persona, canvases, access to research those potential segments, areas that you may have a lack of information about, developing your market selection, thinking about the post-COVID variations, and again, testing any assumptions. Just to think now, we're going to move on to, okay, say we identified the markets, so how are we going to reach them? How are we going to communicate and get to them? And definitions route to markets is very quickly, as it probably is, a range of different methods of that you get your goods or services, your value proposition in that sense, to the customers, and basically different activities generating that demand. So there's 2 kind of main developments. One is what we call B2C, business to consumers. And this is where you're talking directly to the customers. And the aspect are, again, you often have those where you get people just literally walk-in inquiries, whether you're an attraction or a cafe or even accommodation. You often get, a lot of them will be telephone inquiries or email inquiries. Again, website bookings. So again, if you have your availability on either through different OTAs, online travel agents, or booking engines, then again, there's opportunities on that. And social media interfaces, blogs, vlogs, or video logs, podcasts, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, etc. There are loads of different ways to reach it. Now, the thing about social media, we'll pick a bit of time on that, but you have to remember that, in a sense, 3/4 of the world population is using that every day. And therefore, there's opportunities to reach a huge range. And actually, the whole web aspect, the real leveling of the playing field, where you don't need a lot of resources to access your target markets. The other aspect is thinking through, is just remember that, every time you go and looking at the B2C side, that's often the best way, because you have that building that relationship. And one thing about tourism, we're a people industry, we deal with people, we build that relationship. And a lot of that experience is down to the people factor, the quality of service. And therefore, the stronger you can build that relationship with your potential customers, then the better, because what you do is you build trust, and trust is like, the big value. If you have trust, people will, become loyal. And therefore, building that trust with customers is a really important factor. Just to keep moving on, because I'm conscious of time, or half an hour left, is, again, from your customers, the type of details you record, what information do you capture? You probably have your contact details, email, postal address, telephone numbers, mobile numbers. Again, the postal address may be less and less used, but emails may be. But going forward, when technology continuously developing, when we have the 5G network rolled out in the next few years, again, a lot of things will be video calls rather than telephone calls. So all of a sudden it's linking into mobile numbers. Again, many businesses are using such mobiles rather than the landline, or using VoIP, voice operated networks, calls through the internet. So the point I'm highlighting is the way things are going to continue to change. But you have your contact details, and you need to, obviously, that's a core base of your data records. What social media channels are your customers engaged with? And it varies from country to country or region, cities. Different demographics have different aspects. So again, if you're looking at kind of maybe your prime target areas of maybe 25 to 55 age group, Facebook might be, and if it's women, it's Facebook are higher users of that than males, for example. Males use Twitter more than Facebook's. So again, once you know a bit about your customers, you can then look at what channels would be the best way to reach them. And so one of the key things is trying to find out what social media channels they may be engaged with, because there'll be conversations going on there that you can get in and start influencing as well. Of course, you probably ask them, how did it find you? How did they book with you? You probably, if it's through an online booking agent, you obviously have that information already. But again, you can then ask them about what key, if they did a Google search or a web search, what keywords were they using? Were they looking specifically for you, or did they just look generally and came across you? Were you on the front, what keywords was the search engine, use of a search engine? Do you have that kind of embedded in your website, so you have that kind of high priority on terms of the Google spiders and that front and being on the front page of the Google search? Again, what experiences they like and engage with their stay. So if they mentioned that they're there for a wedding anniversary, do you note that down? In fact, that you can then remind them years later, happy anniversary. It's an opportunity to have an engagement with them. And again, purpose of the past visit on that front, whether it's a celebration or so the more data you can pick up, the better it is. Even what kind of newspaper or a media channel they should use for information, what activities they do. So, and everyone in the organization has that opportunity. Coming back to those touch points of the customer journey, all those touch points are opportunities where you can capture insight to the customers. And those who have been with you before, you have much greater insights. And then you can say, well, I have this knowledge, that's my target segment. Probably, as a lot of people said from that last exercise, people in Scotland or Central Belt, or possibly the rest of the UK. But basically, there's that kind of staycation bubble. Okay, that's very is they coming from a point of view of families? Are they meeting up with other families? Are they therefore, because they're still concerned, more likely to do self-catering than service accommodation? Are they looking at bigger venues or smaller venues, etc.? Are they looking for outdoor activities versus maybe indoor activities? That's the kind of information that allows you to get into their aspects, and your personas will pick that information up. So again, capturing that data. And one of the thing aspect about how marketing is moving is this aspect of big data. You might have heard the term, but basically, because everything's digitalized now, we have data, oodles of data. Actually, probably too much data. So the question really is, what's the best data you need to be able to reach and understand and target your customers effectively? And therefore, as for example, we talked a bit about the 5 A's: access, someone living in Norway. Maybe they're living with a commuter range of an airport that flies directly out of Aberdeen. You can then find those people in social media. Facebook, you can target an individual on Facebook through the different aspects of their search ability. So I used to always say when we did market segmentation, one-legged Argentina rugby players. You can find those now. Before, I used to use as an example of trying to find a very specific segment. The point is now not only can you define them, but you can find them as well. So that aspect of digital marketing becomes the norm and allows you to get that very much targeting. Here's an example where Kieran and me were just talking a bit about walking holidays, and we were just, I was just using an example where we're focusing on finding a walking holiday where, and where do we find an idea? And so, yes, we might search on walking holidays in England, and we might be talking a bit about touch points. So we might look at Visit Aberdeenshire's website, we might look at Visit Scotland's, we might go to the Ramblers Association, we might look at origin surveys maps, we might talk to walking clubs or outdoor suppliers, we might look through media stories, social media, word of mouth. All these are different ways that we will potentially gather insight. What are our 5 A's that influences us? Well, from that perspective, we may look at going into areas that we haven't been before. So, maybe we want something which basically we can do with our partners who, don't want to do extreme walking, but want to do walks and then have a nice pub meal or something linked to that. So again, the getting in, the way we look at that, the words we use on Google to gather insights, where we gather information, you can use that customer journey process as Kieran and myself on terms of walking holidays. And we can walk through that and look at all the different aspects and say, okay, here's the opportunities. So maybe we talk to, not only don't we work with Visit Aberdeenshire and Visit Scotland, maybe we talk to the Ordnance Survey and say, okay, well, people who are downloading maps for the Northeast, can we work in partnership with you to try to get, on that front? Maybe people who are searching on social media, looking for walking routes in the Northeast, and maybe then Facebook advertising can then pick that up, or it could be linked into Instagram or whatever. So what I'm highlighting is there's that example of walking holidays. Oops, daisy. So that's kind of the direct channel. The indirect channel is the business to business. This is where you're using your kind of intermediates to help access a wider marketplace. So you got your DMOs, DMC, destination management companies, you got your tour operators, wholesales, travel agents, inbound tour operators, group coach travel, lifestyle concierges, online travel distribution, GDS, global distribution services. So there's lots of different channels that you can access. And the thing is, sometimes they have specific requirements. So for example, inbound tour operators may have a certain dimension of size of parties that they need to be able to handle. They also may have timing aspects. So as highlighted by in our discussion about the cruise ships, they have basically a kind of a certain time limitation. So they have to have an activity within that, and they're looking for different aspects behind that. Again, there's lots of different aspects. Wholesalers, again, are often linked in, in individual tourism businesses with retail experience. So, things like Albatross Travel, Great Days, Trafalgar, Service, Resin, again, in Germany, TUI, so forth. So again, there's opportunities on that front. If you have so again, you need to think about these different aspects, inbound tour operators, also aspects on that front. So there are opportunities. And they're not only looking at large kind of groups, but they're also quite happy to sell to fully independent travelers as well. In terms of just one area that I just wanted to focus on is on OTAs, online travel agencies. So again, you've probably heard of many of these. Some of you have been, especially the accommodation providers, involved with Expedia or Priceline. Again, they have a number of different brands underneath them. So Booking.com, Kayak, Cheap Flights, etc., are all part of Priceline. Expedia has Travelocity, Trivago, etc., hotels. And then some other ones. Google and is getting into it as well. Skyscanner is so forth. So there's lots of different opportunities. And again, OTAs can be a key part of your travel mix, of your channel mix for different targeting, especially overseas business. And the digital sales are growing at 15% growth per annum. And 10% growth of hotel online sales. So the point is, everyone can use them. It's just about how you manage, and you obviously got the pricing and commission side of it as well. And you just need to be able to think about it. But they do open up and they do run campaigns. So for example, TripAdvisor is another aspect. Have been running a campaign. I've got some direct communications from TripAdvisor regarding a couple of destinations in the UK, but also other aspects. So what I'm highlighting is that, they're very much, Priceline, Expedia are currently the global leaders on the OTA side of things. They have historically focused on the hotel side of things, but they're moving into much other aspects. Airbnb is another example of and we'll come on to that in a second, but there are lots of different groups on that front. And again, if you exclude Google, the biggest travel site in the world is actually TripAdvisor. And again, Visit Aberdeenshire is working with different OTAs, again, to help build up that profile. But one of the things they do need is we need, obviously, if they're going to search on the Aberdeenshire and the Northeast, they need some content of people there. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to promote that. So there is an element of we needing more people to get engaged on the OTA side of things. Again, there's also more luxury aspects and individual boutique aspects. So Mr. and Mrs. Smith.com is another one. Secret Escapes is a membership-based OTA selling, to sign up membership-based. So there's lots of different aspects on that kind of B2B channel. Okay, so thinking about other online channel disruptors, Airbnb is a classic where they've changed the marketplace. Airbnb capitalization market value is now more than the Hilton Group. That's been around for 150 years, and yet Airbnb has only been around 15 years. 15 years about that. So again, but they can also now look on like real-time online bookings from attractions. As a result of COVID, a lot of attractions had to move on to online booking. And that was an eye-opener for a lot of people because it really helped improve the efficiency and operational side of things. So all of a sudden you knew what peaks and troughs demand was. Again, looking at without real-time bookings, B2B bookings, businesses are likely to remain reliant on in-destination purchases. So again, once they're in the destination, then you may look at those different routes of reaching them. So you have the aspects of different aspects, whether it's traditional leaflets for attractions or more importantly, maybe looking at different partners. One of the key things, since we talked about all that data at the beginning, is how you capture and manage your data. So that CRM, customer relationship management software. And again, there's lots of different softwares out there, but it allows you, it basically is a mechanism to organize your database. I use if you don't have a huge database, less than 250 customer base, then actually there's some software out there that's free. Capsule.com is one that I've often utilized. And again, there's different aspects behind it, but what it allows you to do is organize your data in a way that allows you to tie it in with social media. And you can then capture that data from that. So it's about being customer orientated. You need obviously the competence in being able to run and keeping the data up to date and managed, but it allows you opportunities. So you can capture that in a little touch point of information, whether it's a wedding anniversary or whether it's what paper they used in the morning. So when they come back, you can then almost preempt it and say, would you like the same paper as you had last time, sir? And almost that relationship can help build that relationship. So again, there's opportunities to look at different aspects on that. But the key thing about that is, is capturing the right data and being able to use that data in a way that adds value to your business. So the more you know about them, you can then build that rapport, that trust, and the loyalty, as I mentioned before. In terms of social media platforms, again, it doesn't mean that social media replaces a CRM system. The two work hand in glove. There are two aspects behind that. And social media is basically about creating engagement opportunities. It's creating that opportunity to create that unique user experience, but also being able to have a conversation with multiple. So rather than having a conversation one-to-one over the telephone, you can be having a conversation 1 to 1,000, 1 to 1,000,000 potentially, depending on their the discussion groups. So in one sense, it's also about not being don't be pushy with social media. It's about engaging, listening, and solving it. And so and it's becoming a much more the norm for lots of different market segments, especially the younger segments. Almost all of them utilize their knowledge through social media discussions. So there's an opportunity to be engaging with them and helps develop and raise your profile of the brand. So again, if you probably engage with it, a lot of people have social media, but they're not engaging it. You're not utilizing it to the full capacity. And so one of the things is it does take time. You do need to have that content and develop this content for the different postings. And you need to be able to engage in conversation. So that there is an element behind that, but it's no different really than talking to people on the phone, other than you're typing it through the social media platforms. And some of them are very visual. So for example, we talked about outdoor activities. You can do videos and so forth, and the Instagram is very good for that. TikTok is another good one on the video side from, especially the younger generation. So again, depending who you're targeting and where your customers are, hanging out, as I call it, then you need to think about which social media platform would be part of the way to reach that target market. Again, that engagement with people, and the research shows that those who have high customer engagement, that continued relationship. So after they stayed with you and you keep that engagement going, you keep that conversation going post-visit until the next time they come back, they show that, the more you engage with the client, 23% more profitable. And that's linked to a Gallup survey in 2017. So it's true the ability to engage your customers is very, very important. And there's different aspects of focusing. The last one I want to talk to you, which is the most powerful one of all, of course, as people know, is word of mouth, and how you can get your customers, in effect, to become your Salesforce team. So if you think about it, if you had 100 customers in 2019, let's use that, let's avoid 2020, then if you can get all 100 of those to talk positively about you and share that with their friends and relatives, then all of a sudden you have a sales force of 100 people. You can never afford that probably on your own, but you could engage your customers to be those ambassadors to promote that. Word of mouth obviously is online reviews, recommendations, and opinions. You'll be familiar with TripAdvisor, I'm sure, and other aspects on that. But again, it's just those elements behind that. And basically what you have is social customers, as we now call them, which kind of integrate both the online and offline channels when conducting their purchases. So they're looking at the online reviews, but then they're going offline to maybe make a phone call to make a booking or going straight onto your website. So again, you need to think about not just your physical word of mouth, but also the word of mouth side of it as well. So that brings me up to our last exercise before we then wrap up. So what we're going to do is this route to market. So what we want you to do is think about your existing customers or your new customers in 2021. So what we just talked about, your post-COVID ones, and then think about how you would reach those segments. What are the best routes to those markets? And then we want to then look at kind of thinking about 2022 and onwards, what new opportunities there may be. Are there new segments or customers, new markets that we can target? Now, on that front, so I'm looking at the short term and then the longer term, and then also potentially any barriers that might stop you from doing that. So now we're gonna do this in a group, Kieran. I think we're going to do this in a group, this week.
We've probably not got time actually thinking about it, Dave. We've only got 10 minutes left.
All right. Okay. Well, okay. Let's spend 5 minutes from them to do that. And then what I'll do is we can then take feedback from individuals from that point of view on what if there are any kind of specific segments they can highlight, and any kind of, especially any barriers that might stop them from reaching those people. Okay. So what I'd like you to do is think about your customers, your target markets, and think about, okay, how am I going to reach them? What's the best way to reach them? Is it through the traditional channels? Is it through social media, etc.? And then think about in terms of your staycation market, if that's what your focus in 2021 is, and then think about how you might reach them in terms of that. So in the group discussion we had, maybe in partnership or collaboration process. Okay, so should we give them 10 minutes? 7 minutes, Kieran?
Yeah. 7 minutes. 2 now. Okay,
so question I have is, did anyone find any issue about identifying the kind of best routes? Did they have a mixture of different aspects? So if anyone wants to, or any kind of barriers they may find to reaching those markets, anyone want to discuss that, or any questions? Looking if anyone's raising their hand. Okay, well, I'm just going to pick up one if I can then from our discussion group before, which was in the longer term, obviously the cruise ships, people mentioned that already. And also events at the P&J live. Those type of opportunities allows development of new opportunities to reach out to people. So if you remember when you had the Sports Personality of the Year aspect for one of the first events at the P&J, that created awareness of not only of Aberdeen and across the UK and abroad, especially on a sports related aspect. And I remember, obviously watching that and getting exposure of the brand. So there was an example where we're using a media form to reach out to create awareness. From that, potentially if you had elements, I don't know, maybe you had one of the celebrities staying at your accommodation or something like that, you could write on the back of that. So often when you're reaching out, sometimes you want to reach out directly to the target market. Sometimes you have to go into, in effect, a indirect route, which is linking into their discussion. So during another example I can give you is, if any of you have been watching The Crown this year, the very first episode was obviously filmed at, around Balmoral, and there was an opportunity for engagement on social media around that. For example, a lot of people know that Balmoral is in Scotland, but they don't know where in Scotland it is. So actually being able to have that during that kind of social media discussion during that episode, be able to kind of pick up and say, well, actually it's in the Northeast, it's, you know, and being able to pinpoint that, linking something that they see to awareness. Now, again, going forward in the future with smart TVs, you'll be able to actually literally go into that, touch your screen and find me and say to me, find me holidays at Balmoral, and that, you know, you have that opportunity to reach out. So technology will play a role of interacting, but actually you still need to go back and understand where your customers are, what's their interests, and then finding the routes to them. Okay, Kieran, any messages or anything like that? Just conscious of time. So where we're up to then is you've got your different aspects, and from that you want to develop an action plan. What can you kind of ease issues and priorities in terms of your target markets, and then what actions you need to do, whether it's research, maybe it's basically linking and keeping that relationship going with previous customers, by whom and when you're going to get it done by. So that's your typical action plan. But where I want to focus on is just a recap in terms of the routes to market. So you got your business to consumers, which is a lot of you will be familiar with, but you also have your B2B, business to business side. You need to think about those different aspects. You need to think about the data sources that you can capture from that, what information you need, the social media platforms. So for example, you know, what platforms would be best to reach that target market segment. Again, one of the things you may want to start picking up is engaging that. Now, some of the CRM systems, for example, will automatically search the main social media platforms and identify that for you. So Capsule's one of those that allows you to do that. And that is a way for you to start engaging with them. But again, you can then develop social media groups and discussions. So for example, in our breakout group, Nigel was talking about the golf opportunities, working with Visit Scotland. Again, there's a need to maybe potentially through that partnership, you can develop a social media discussion group around that event in July, and then build up that discussion, which then links on wider partners around that. The key one, of course, is that word of mouth, and maintaining that and using your existing customers. So in the short term, I'll be looking at, you know, keeping in relationship with previous customers and almost having that relationship to try to say, you know, there is from the market research a feeling that the staycation market dudes want to stay local. They do want to help out the businesses in the UK. So there's an element of that feeling to help out. And so a bit of a prompt from yourselves to your previous customers may say, you know, it's been a tough year. We really would love to be able to see you this year. And, you know, again, you'll be always being a previous customer, you know, a priority for us. So that almost personal plea for them to kind of re-engage will maybe carry some weight as well. But again, it links back to communicating the right message to the right person at the right time. The KPIs, you know, it's just the measurements of how you measure that side of things. So again, you can gather that information, but also thinking about the different routes to market for not only this year, but also next year and beyond, and thinking about the partnership aspects behind that. So from that perspective, that's two key aspects of an element in studying the different target markets and then the routes to those markets. And the key aspect is, as I say, the more you can understand about your customer segments that you're targeting, the easier it is to communicate. And that's gathering that insight, which is working with Visit Aberdeenshire and Visit Scotland. So Elaine, I'm going to finish there. I'm going to pass over to you if I can, and to do the final summary.
Thank you, David. Just picking up on some of the points we covered during the webinar, and in particular, other activities we're undertaking as part of our business recovery programme. David talked at the start of the webinar about the importance of using customer insights and data. And just wanted to highlight that we have developed as part of our programme a new best practice manual on our website. It's full of lots of practical tips and advice on how you can go about gathering your own data, and also key sources of insights on different customer types and markets. We'll send a link to that when we send out a recording of the webinar, so you can access it quite easily. Also, part of our recovery programme, we are continuing with our travel trade readiness activity. David on B2B routes, which is working with travel trade intermediaries to take your particular product or experience to market. We're rolling out a series of those over the next few weeks, including one on working with online tour operators and one on an introduction to working with the travel trade. We'll have full details of our up and coming newsletters. And we're also offering another webinar which flows on directly from this one. And it's about developing a marketing strategy. The date for that one is the 2nd of March, and we'll be sending out more details and a registration link soon. We focused today on how to go about identifying your target markets and adopting a strategic approach, and provided a range of tools and canvases to help you do that. But we all, that yourselves and us at Visit Aberdeenshire, of course, are always thirsty for as much customer insights that we can get. So over the next 2 or 3 months, we anticipate a cluster of reports being released on research that's ongoing. There's research going on by the National UK Tourist Boards, which will be published towards the end of March. Scottish Visit Scotland is also looking at engaging with their audience to understand UK residents' plans for holiday taking in Scotland, and that's due at the end of March. And some of you may have attended webinars we had a few months ago from 56 Degree Insight, who are also looking at the Scottish market and holiday taking intentions. They're waiting until lockdown restrictions are eased so they can get a very good picture. So there should be a lot of data flowing in the next 8 to 12 weeks. And again, we'll feature that in your newsletters, and we'll be offering webinars to share that with you as well. Finally, we'll be issuing a short survey to you, asking you for your feedback on today's webinar. We'd really appreciate it if you can take time to complete it. It's useful for us in forward planning, and it helps us to understand what you need, what you need next. So finally, I'd just like to thank David and Kieran for the webinar today. From anecdotal feedback in the chat, a number of people have found that quite thought-provoking in terms of taking a structured approach. So thank you for your time today. Apologies that we've run a few minutes late, and have a nice evening when it starts. Thank you.